So, in fact, that's one measure of ending up in the middle way, is there is a me here that's a dependently arising me. That is the middle way. But more of that still to come. Okay. So then if we continue here, it says, so he said here, basically, if you don't strip away enough, you stay stuck in the extreme of existence. If you strip away too much, you end up in nihilism. And it says here, thus the dangers are very great, and he's quoting here from Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamika Karika, his fundamental wisdom in the middle way. He says, and Nagarjuna is really the founder of this Madhyamika philosophical system of emptiness. He wrote a classic text, this text here in the 2nd century, which is really the foundation of, again, what's called the Madhyamika philosophical system in Buddhism, which is really the philosophical system we're following here in this understanding of emptiness. And he says, if their view of emptiness is faulty, those of little wisdom will be ruined. It's just like handling a snake in the wrong way or executing a Vidya mantra in the wrong way. Thus, knowing that for the weak-minded this Dharma is difficult to fathom, the mind of the sage completely turned away from teaching this Dharma. Meaning that because through not understanding emptiness, we can get stuck, particularly in nihilism and so forth. Therefore, the Buddha didn't teach this emptiness to a wide range of people. That the ones who really could appreciate and understand, he taught it. To other people, he taught something less that would eventually lead them to that. And then the next sentence says, furthermore, as said in the Perfection of Wisdom of 8,000 verses, so this is one of the Perfection of Wisdom teachings that describe this emptiness. It says, due to grasping to I and mine, all sentient beings cycle in samsara. So I'd like to unpack that now. And to do that, you've got, in the back, you've got this chart called Suffering and Its Causes. So let's have a look at that. So remember again, the sentence there says, due to grasping to I and mine, all sentient beings cycle in samsara. So what that's saying is that it's this false grasping onto independent me that's the root of all of our mental afflictions and suffering. And so let's have a look at how that is the case, how that works. And so we have that suffering and its causes there. So this is describing the process of how our distorted view of reality, how this grasping onto independent me, independent world, leads to our mental afflictions and leads to our suffering. And at the first step, we have what's called seed of ignorance. And here ignorance is this grasping onto independent me, independent world. And seed means habit. So we have the habit of grasping to independent me, independent world. And according to Buddhism, we've had that habit since we were born and well before. Every time we look out on the world, everything appears to exist completely independent of us. So we're receiving what's called dualistic appearance. There appears to be subject-object duality. Subject here, object there, independent. But this view of emptiness is saying things are not existing as they appear. So this appearance that we are receiving is deceiving us. So therefore it's called mistaken dualistic appearance. Now, everything we've ever seen in our entire life has always appeared to exist completely independent of us. And we have the habit of grasping onto and believing those appearances. So actually, we never question appearances because there's no reason to question appearances because we've never seen things in any other way. And if we ask anyone else, everyone else will agree with us. So we never question appearances. So we automatically get to step 2. Which is ignorance, which here, of course, is grasping onto independent me, independent world. Now, every time we experience something, there is a mental factor present called feeling. And feeling in Buddhism doesn't mean emotion. Feeling is a mental factor that simply experiences things as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral.
Sensation.
One second. This word feeling is a translation of the Sanskrit term Vedana. And Vedana, or feeling, can be both sensory and mental. So when we have a pleasant feeling in the body, then often this word Vedana is translated as sensation. When it is in the mind, mentally, we have a pleasant experience in the mind, we often see Vedana translated as feeling. So here, feeling and sensation are both the translation of the same Sanskrit term, Vedana. Now, let's use an example. Let's say we're looking at this cup here. That cup appears to exist completely independent of us. We have the habit of believing that, so we never question that appearance. We just accept, yep, there's a cup there, existing there from its own side. And let's say when we look at this cup, we're having a pleasant experience. That pleasant experience, together with the belief that that cup is existing independent of me there, will naturally lead me to assume there must be some attractive quality there that's causing my pleasant feeling. So we'll see this as inherently attractive or attractive from its own side. And according to this view of emptiness, this is a misconception. Or, when I look at this cup, if I'm having an unpleasant experience, together with the belief that that cup is existing there independent of me, that will naturally lead me to assume there must be some unattractive quality there that's causing my unpleasant experience. So we'll see this cup as inherently unattractive or unattractive from its own side. Or if I'm having a neutral experience, which of course means neither pleasant nor unpleasant, we'll believe it has some inherently neutral qualities. Once we get to step 3, step 4 easily follows. So again, let's say when we're looking at this cup, we're having a pleasant experience. I like pleasant experiences. I want pleasant experiences. That cup seems to be causing my pleasant experience. I want that cup. Attachment. Or if I'm having an unpleasant experience when I see this cup, I don't like unpleasant experiences, I don't want unpleasant experiences, that cup seems to be causing my unpleasant experience. Get it out of here. Aversion. or if I'm having a neutral experience, that will simply reinforce my mistaken belief that that cup exists there independent of me, which of course is ignorance. But often here, instead of the word ignorance, you'll see the word confusion. Confusion here doesn't mean we're confused about whether or not this is a cup. We're confused about how it exists. So the word confusion has the same meaning as ignorance. So what we see here at step 4 then is what's called the 3 poisons, the 3 main mental afflictions. All other mental afflictions come out, mental afflictions like anger, jealousy, fear, anxiety, and so forth, all of them come out of one of those or a combination of them. And this is what is driving our behaviour. And the Buddhist assertion is that every action we do based on a mental affliction has a result. And the results of our actions are our experiences. And to describe collectively our experiences, the Buddha used the word dukkha. Which is most commonly translated as suffering. But here, the word suffering has a much broader meaning than what we normally associate with the word suffering. When we normally see the word suffering, we associate that with simply unpleasant, painful physical and mental experiences. So we're not saying here that all of this just leads to pleasant, unpainful physical and mental experiences. We're saying that it leads to dukkha, which of course is the human condition, where there are of course sometimes unpleasant experiences, sometimes pleasant experiences, and then at a deeper level, what's called all-pervasive dukkha, which is there's always a potential for suffering to arise in our life. So this is the process of how our distorted view of reality leads to the mental afflictions and leads to suffering in terms of that we're stuck in this current condition. So here in the text again it says that due to grasping to I and mine, this, all sentient beings cycle in samsara. So samsara is cycling life after life in this state of dukkha. So that's what we're explaining here. Just to add 1 or 2 more things here, back up here, we said that when we look out on the world around us, everything appears to exist completely independent of us. But we're saying that this is, things do not exist as they appear. That's the assertion here. But then you might ask, well, if things don't exist like that, why do they appear to exist like that? And the answer is back here at ignorance. Every time we grasp onto independent me, independent world, and of course this is not intellectual, it's instinctive, every time we're grasping, we're reinforcing the habit of grasping. But there's also a side effect of that grasping, called latency of ignorance, and it's a little bit like a stain. And what that stain of ignorance does is it acts like a filter. It means that when we look out on the world, then everything that appears to us appears to exist completely independent of us. So this stain is like we're looking out on the world through the stain of ignorance. That's why everything appears to exist completely independent of us. And so if we go right back to where we started this morning, we said that this text is called the main path of the victors. And a victor is a Buddha And a Buddha is someone who's overcome those two obscurations, the afflictive and the cognitive. So remember, the afflictive obscurations were all the mental afflictions. So the mental afflictions, of course, is all this, from step 1 up to 4, all of this. All of this is the afflictive obscurations. And if we want to be liberated from suffering, then we need to get rid of those, particularly the root one, ignorance. But then these stains are still in our mind. They're very hard to get rid of. And these stains, plus the mistaken dualistic appearance that they produce, this is the cognitive obscuration. So to achieve liberation, to achieve nirvana, we practice Vipassana, practice of emptiness, get rid of ignorance, mental afflictions, suffering, liberated, nirvana. Easy. But even if we have achieved nirvana, we still have these stains in our mind. They're very hard to get rid of. So even someone who has achieved nirvana, when they look out on the world appears to exist independent of them as well. But because they've realised emptiness, they'll know these appearances are deceptive. They'll never buy into them. So it never causes a problem. But they're still there. So what we need to do is continue to meditate on emptiness on the basis of bodhicitta, and then we can slowly wipe out these stains of ignorance, which is going to wipe out this mistaken dualistic appearance, and then we'll become enlightened. We'll become this victor who's then eliminated both the afflictive and the cognitive obscurations. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Until number 4,
Yeah.
it's equivalent to the teachings of the 5 skandhas, actually.
Yeah, you can use the 5 aggregates or 5 skandhas to follow the same, more or less the same thing.
Yeah, and just the 5th one and the 6th one is a little different, but...
I mean, the 5 skandhas, of course, teachings can be understood in a number of ways. That's one way.
Right.
Yeah. In terms of the perception and then the feeling and then the discrimination and the...
Yeah, and then the mind and the conceptual mind.
Yeah. So you can map that onto the first 4 stages, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there an explanation why or where or how in step number 2 feeling got into the mix?
Feeling got into the mix.
Why something got pleasant or unpleasant?
Oh, why it got pleasant?
Yeah.
Got pleasant. That's just why a particular thing for us is pleasant or unpleasant is just personal conditions. Why that cup for you is pleasant and for someone else is unpleasant is just many factors in terms of personal history, physiological makeup, all sorts of things. So it's just basically causes and conditions that would lead to us experiencing certain thing. And of course also, not just that, but what's immediately preceding that. Like, we may be in a certain state of mind. Normally, maybe, for example, if we look there, we see it as pleasant. But maybe on a particular day, we're full of anger. And then we look there, it probably doesn't look very pleasant then. We probably won't have a pleasant experience. So that anger is acting as a condition to influence how we experience that. So there are many factors which will contribute, again, personal history, physiological factors, current mental state, all these various factors will contribute to determine really what that experience is. But the experience is not a choice. It's not like we sit there and we choose to experience it in a certain way. This is all set up depending on all these factors that will determine what, in the moment, the experience you will have.
Like noise.
Noise. Yeah, same. Like sometimes a particular noise we hear sounds pleasant. But then that same noise, if we're trying to meditate, we'll probably see as unpleasant because it's bothering us. No?
Yeah.
So, which actually can be very helpful to understand that where is the unpleasantness? Is it there? Or maybe not. The same thing here is, if we're having a pleasant experience, does that mean the beauty is there? If the beauty was there, it would mean everyone who looked there would have to have a pleasant experience. But I'm sure that's not the case. So therefore, by understanding these sorts of things, and this is the idea someone mentioned up before, this idea of interdependency, this is really going to help us to understand emptiness. The idea of, because that's the flip side of emptiness. So by looking at these sorts of things and understanding this, that can really help us to appreciate what emptiness really is. You know, we say that, for example, don't we hear sometimes beauty is in the eye of the beholder? But does that mean we're fabricating beauty? Does that mean we are hallucinating beauty? No. So that's those two extremes. Now we're stuck in this stream of existence. The beauty's there. And if we correctly understand that that's not there, but we then throw the baby out with the bathwater, we end up with the fact, oh, therefore, if the beauty's not there, then I'm just hallucinating the beauty. I'm just fabricating it. It doesn't really exist. Then we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. So if we understand that beauty in the eye of the beholder does not mean that, it means that beauty is arising due to our particular interaction in this moment with that object. It's a dependent arising. So beauty is real, but it's not there and it's not here.
Can you elaborate a little bit where do emotions fit into this model?
Actually, I think in Tibetan there's no word for emotion. And actually, when we look at Buddhist psychology, there's no real talk about emotions. Why is that? In fact, we talked here about, I used this word mental affliction. Which is a translation of a Sanskrit term, klesha. And sometimes this word klesha is translated as disturbing emotions, afflictive emotions. But I think that's not very accurate, because most of these kleshas are not emotions. Because from a sort of Buddhist psychology perspective, it's not what the verbal and physical display is doing, it's what's driving that is the important thing. So what you find is that, often we talk about anger, disturbing emotion. But anger in Buddhism is not an emotion. Because anger is really, the core of anger in Buddhism is the intention to harm. So that's what's driving our behaviour. Similarly with attachment. Attachment's not an emotion. A disturbing emotion. Attachment is the intention to want to grab and hold something. So basically what we find in this sort of Buddhist psychology, it's really what is the intention, what is driving the behaviour, and not what the surface display looks like. And so therefore you don't really see much about emotions, because emotions is all about, the verbal and physical display. So therefore, for example, I remember reading a book recently by a psychologist. It was about anger. And he said, because in Buddhism we say we need to eliminate it 100%. And this psychologist, well-known psychologist, said, you Buddhists have got it completely wrong. He said, you've got it completely wrong. It's not about eliminating anger. It's about having the right type of anger at the right time in the right amount. And then it became very obvious to me he didn't understand how the word anger was used in Buddhism. Because anger in Buddhism is the intention to harm. That's never okay. Whereas he was maybe using the word anger in terms of, in fact, his example was, if you don't do that, how could you deal with difficult situations like social injustice if you don't get angry? So he was, I think, more or less saying you need to have a strong voice and maybe use very strong behaviour in voice. In Buddhism, that's not anger. What's underneath it is what counts. If you do that strong voice and behaviour with an intention to harm, then that's no good. If your intention is compassion to help, then it's not anger. So you can deal with social injustice using very strong language and behaviour motivated by compassion. So this is the key. Yeah.
Connecting this whole thing to the self that we spoke before. Or
The self. Right.
Or the misconception of self. Can you say that the not misconception, the real self, okay, is the one that is not doesn't have attachment, that knows, not that even doesn't have, that knows that there is a state of attachment, there is a state of ignorance, there is a state of...
Yeah. So here, we have attachment because it seems like that's independent of us. But when we realise emptiness, the flip side of that is we'll realise there is a dependent me here, dependent on many factors which we're going to look at, I think, in the next session already.
No, but I'm saying, who knows that?
Right. So
who is that? Is that the
yeah,
self?
yeah. So therefore, and that's something we're going to look at more tomorrow morning, is the dependent me. I mean, the only me that exists is a dependent me. This independent me that seems to be here, that we're holding on to, doesn't exist. Actually, if you think about it, it's a little bit crazy. Something that never has existed, cannot exist, will never exist, is the root of all of our mental afflictions and suffering. A non-existent is the root cause of all of our suffering. It's only because we believe it exists we have mental afflictions and suffering. So therefore, if we can let go of that grasping through the emptiness practice, then of course what's left is the me that does exist, the dependent me, which of course there's no boundary then. There's no sort of me here and them there. But more about that will come later.
It's very tricky.
Yeah. Like I said, we have these two extremes and we're stuck in the extreme of existence now, very tightly, and we don't even question it. We need to start questioning it. But then what happens is, for us, there's two choices. Either there is an independent me, independent world, or there's no me and no world, because we've never seen anything else. So when we start questioning this, then the most common thing is we just flip to the other extreme of nihilism. That's the most common thing. But then, when we end up in nihilism, to overcome that, we need to reflect on the flip side of emptiness, the dependent arising. So if you find yourself falling to nihilism, there's no me, then you say, no, there's a me, there's a dependent me, depending on many factors. And we're going to look at that shortly.
Could you give an example about confusion as well as poison? Like, how does...
It's synonymous with ignorance, same as ignorance. So you can put ignorance here. It's the same meaning. There's a slightly different Sanskrit word, but it's the same meaning here, exactly the same.
But how does it arise from, like, what, can you give an example of what misconceptions do it? Like, how
yeah, because like the example, we look at this cup, we have a neutral experience. That neutral experience will simply reinforce my belief that that cup is existing independent of me. So that's ignorance. So that seeing it as inherently neutral will just reinforce the fact that that is independent of me. Whereas the attractive, unattractive will lead to attachment and aversion.